NASA Viking missions to Mars in the 1970s. The Viking missions to Mars were sent by NASA in 1975 to take high-resolution photos of the planet, learn more about its chemical composition, and test to find any life on Mars. The Viking missions were historically profound because they were the first successful landings on Mars, both overall and in the US, and they functioned until 1982, Viking 1, and 1980, Viking 2.
The data NASA received from the Viking missions was the first of its kind, standing out in history like a shining star. These missions completely changed the United States' understanding of Mars, leading to continued interest in the relatively unexplored planet. There had never been a completely successful mission to Mars before, and still today, research done on Mars is based on the findings of the Viking missions.
During the 1970s, the space race between the USA and the USSR had come to a close with the moon landings in 1969. However, the aftermath of the space race still lingered in the world. The first space station was created in 1971 by the USSR. Later that year, the Mariner 9 orbited Mars for 1 year and proved that the red planet had diverse geography. Pioneer 10 was a space probe launched in 1972 by NASA that explored the outer planets of our solar system. NASA also built the Titan III Centaur rocket stage, a launch system that would send off the Viking missions in 1975. Later, the Titan III Centaur would launch the solar system-bound Voyager missions. The American public was intrigued by Mars exploration and possible Martian life, especially since we had just landed on the moon a few years prior. Many people were crucial for the Viking space mission. Here are just a few. Al Hibbs, a rocket scientist, was known to be the voice of the Voyager and other unmanned spacecrafts. Before the Voyager, he helped design the Explorer, the first U.S. satellite to orbit the Earth. John Newcomb served on the Viking management team, along with Norman Krabil, Viking mission design manager, Gus Gustafaro, Viking deputy project manager, Paul Seamers, Viking lander aerothermodynamics engineer, and Joel Levine, a former NASA Langley scientist. The 5 of them are known as the Old Vikings. James S. Martin Jr. was the leader of the Viking mission. Before Viking, he was the former assistant manager to the Lunar Orbiter program. Through this, he won NASA's Exceptional Service Medal in 1967. A. Thomas Young was the mission director of the Viking mission. The Viking mission helped him win NASA's highest award, the Distinguished Service Medal. Israel Tabak was known as the godfather for the Viking mission. Tabak was responsible for most of the atmosphere surrounding the lander. Tabak was in charge of building the lander. Gerald A. Stoffen was a biologist and chief scientist for the Viking missions. He also helped develop NASA's astrobiology program for studying life in the universe.
Viking 1 was launched from Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral on August 20th, 1975, with Viking 2 being launched on September 9th, 1975. The main goal of the Viking missions were to test for life on Mars and better understand the geographic conditions of the planet. These missions would utilize 2 component spacecrafts that consisted of an orbiter and a lander each. The orbiters would reach the atmosphere and circle the planet to take up-close pictures of the Martian surface. The landers would touch down on Mars and take soil samples, photographs, and other biological data. Due to unsafe conditions detected by computer analysis, the landing of Viking 1 had to be pushed back. Eventually, on July 20th, 1976, the computers on board Viking 1 initiated the landing sequence.
Viking 2 joined orbit around Mars on August 7, 1976. Because of Viking 1's success in landing, the Viking 2 chose a more ambitious destination on the planet. The Viking 1 lander touched down at the Christ Planitia on Mars, and the Viking 2 lander touched down at the Utopia Planitia. The world was disappointed to learn that the Viking missions had not found life, but later studies have shown that with more developed technology, extraterrestrial bacteria could possibly be found under the surface of Mars. Viking 1 ended its communications on November 13, 1982, and Viking 2 only lasted until April 11, 1980.
Viking gave us the first view of Mars as if we were standing on the surface. It lasted over 6 years, but never did find conclusive evidence for life on the red planet.
After all, that was the whole purpose of the Viking mission, was to go and land on the surface, scoop up some soil, and see whether or not this planet had developed life. Well, we're still looking for that life, but today we think it's in particular areas. It's not just anywhere on the planet. So we have to be special about where we go to look for it.
Viking did provide a wealth of data. It mapped the entire planet and charted seasonal changes. People began to see the real Mars. Every time we've gone to Mars, we've increased our ability to see details. And we've seen a brand new Mars. But for a Viking, no picture could ever be more powerful than the first one.
Every single time we have gone there, it's been a brand new Mars. But the biggest brand new Mars of all time was in July of 1976.
The impact the Viking missions have had on NASA and the world is astronomical. While the public was hoping for some form of life on Mars, the close-up photos of canyons, mountains, and plains intrigued the science community. Since the end of the Viking missions, the possibility of human travel and colonization of Mars has become a topic of debate. Missions following the Vikings were Phobos 1, Phobos 2, the Mars Observer, Pathfinder, and many more, all affected by the initial research conducted by the Viking missions. The Vikings were not only the first successful NASA missions to Mars, they were the first in the world, too.
The Viking missions informed the world of the biological properties of Mars, including potential for life. People learned what the surface of Mars looked like and what the chemical composition was like. The new information inspired future missions and plans for travel and exploration. This was important because it established information about Mars to not only the US but to the world. Even though the missions did not find conclusive evidence in the 1970s, it gave a wealth of knowledge on our neighbor planet. We are still learning based off of the findings of the Viking missions. NASA, Kennedy Space Center, and all the scientists involved helped to create a lasting legacy for Mars exploration through the Viking missions.